Hello, everyone. Apologies for a false start there. I'm Jackie Pfeffer-Merrill, Director of the Campus Free Expression Project at the Bipartisan Policy Center in Washington, D.C. On behalf of the Bipartisan Policy Center and our colleagues at the Baylor and Washington program, I'm glad to be the first to welcome you to today's webinar, A New Roadmap for Campus Free Expression. Today's conversation will focus on the BPC Academic Leaders Task Force report, Campus Free Expression, A New Roadmap, released shortly after Thanksgiving. Today's conversation will take place among three members of the task force, Baylor President Linda Livingstone, until last week, President of Concordia College, New York, and now Senior Fellow at the Center for Religion, Culture, and Democracy, John Nunes, and CEO of Challenge Seattle and former Governor of Washington State, Chris Gregoire. The conversation will be moderated by Baylor and Washington Director, Professor David Corey. The Bipartisan Policy Center is a Washington, D.C. think tank that takes the best ideas from both parties to promote security and opportunity for American families. We're the only organization registered in the District of Columbia that has the word bipartisan in its name. BPC knows that colleges and universities have a special role in our democracy in preparing this generation for civic leadership and engaged citizenship, and teaching the values of mutual respect and civil disagreement. However, the principles of freedom of expression and academic freedom are under stress on today's campuses, and the climate for college conversation is constrained on many campuses. That makes it more challenging for colleges and universities to fulfill their academic and civic missions, and it makes it harder for this generation to be prepared to be bipartisan leaders ready to forge constructive compromises across principled disagreement. That's why in late 2020, the Bipartisan Policy Center convened the Academic Leaders Task Force under the leadership of Governors Chris Gregoire and Jim Douglas. The task force, which approved its report unanimously, is comprised of a dozen members, including a recent college graduate, civic leaders and former governors, and presidents and academic leaders from a diverse range of colleges and universities, including two faith-based institutions, a Hispanic serving institution, a historically Black college and university, liberal arts colleges, and research universities. The task force's report is a direct response to challenges to free expression on today's college campuses. It is a strategic guide for fostering a culture of free expression amid today's challenges of polarization and an uncivil tone in our national discourse. Before turning the conversation over to Professor David Corey, just to say a few words about those who will be part of the conversation today and our co-sponsors for the webinar. Those are also leaders on freedom of expression issues, and we're so grateful for their being co-sponsors today: the Academic Freedom Alliance, the American Council of Trustees Alumni, Heterodox Academy, the Chautauqua Institution, and the Institute for Humane Studies. Thank you very much. And now, Professor Corey, over to you.
Thanks so much, Jackie, for that introduction. And I would like to add my gratitude to the co-sponsors who have helped us get the word out about this very important report from your organization, Jackie. I want to also thank our panelists, Linda and Chris and John. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to have a conversation about the report. I'm grateful for your time and for serving on the task force. And I wanted to ask, I really liked this report, and that's partly why we wanted to do this panel. I thought it was different from so much of what I've seen on freedom of speech issues. I think so often we see a lot of sort of diagnosis, but not a lot of strategic suggestions. And this report was long on strategic suggestions. So I thought it was incredibly valuable. I wanted to just start by asking a little bit about the task force before we dig into the report. Maybe I could direct this to you, Chris. What sort of considerations were on your mind as you were putting together the members of this task force? I understand there were about 12 members of the task force. What were you looking for?
So we really began this, a couple of governors, Jim Douglas and myself included, working with the Bipartisan Policy Council, troubled by what we had seen happen on two campuses, one Berkeley and the other University of Washington, where a conservative individual had been asked to speak, in both instances, as I understand it, by a student organization, had resulted in violence, a shooting in one instance, a burning in the other. And we really began to ask the question, these presidents are kind of alone on their own when these crises occur. What is it about the culture of these campuses that's happening? And so we wanted to make sure that with respect to the task force, we really did have a very inclusive group of representation. So we not only had a student organization and a professor and a trustee, but we were really clear we wanted public-private. We wanted secular religious. We wanted research. We wanted land grant. We wanted those who are Hispanic serving and HBCU research. So we looked for literally a cross-section across the country to make sure their voices could be heard. And when we didn't think we had enough, we actually set up panels, for example, a student panel, where we could hear more from them to make sure that the college campuses across the country were well represented.
David, may I just butt in here? Yeah, I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for your leadership here in this conversation. President Livingstone, kudos to you for this Baylor and Washington initiative, a fabulous initiative. Governor Gregoire, just honored to be here with you. I just wanted to add in response to the intentionality that went behind who should be a part of this group. The Concordia University system is affiliated with the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, serving 30,000 plus students in the United States, and often isn't, I don't believe, taken seriously. I really commend the Bipartisan Policy Center for intentionally modeling serious conversation among institutions that had creedal commitments like ours, and institutions that were faith affiliated like Baylor, and institutions where we've had ongoing and serious challenges ourselves in this free expression space. So I think it was a very unique aspect of this project to include these institutions. Thank you so much, Governor Gregoire.
Thank you.
The only thing I would add, I mean, it was just a wonderful group of people to get to know. I knew some of them, but not all of them. And we had some really rich and thoughtful and deep discussions. And, sometimes you think when you're talking about how you make recommendations in an area like this, it's kind of fraught with disagreement sometimes, that there would be a lot of disagreement over what we came down to on recommendations. But at the end of the day, as we worked through these issues, there was a lot of unity around how we can maybe address these issues better on our campuses, how we could better prepare various groups on our campus to deal with these issues. So I found it to be very personally enriching, in addition to hopefully it being beneficial to the academic community more broadly.
Yeah, it seems to me that who gets to be at the table is not unrelated to what you think you can accomplish. And I was wondering if anybody would speak to the question, I mean, what were you trying to do that was different from what so many others have done in defending free expression? What did you think was special about this?
So David, the perspective I was trying to bring to it was, we need to think of a college campus as a microcosm of the country and what the country is experiencing, and the influences and pressures that are brought to bear on those college campuses. So yes, it's important for us to think about first and foremost the students, but the faculty and the professor and the coach and the trustee and the community in which that university resides, and the legislature and its influence and the politics that are brought to bear, so that we really looked at this in a very holistic way to try and find practical ways to prepare these presidents and campuses for the inevitable that they're going to confront this kind of challenge, and how can they better prepare themselves and create the kind of culture that they would be proud of.
It does seem fresh to me, because usually what you get, the end result of a panel or a task force like this would be a statement. And the statement would be implementable if colleges and universities wanted to implement it. But this isn't a statement, and it's very sensitive to the different environments in different kinds of educational settings. And it's sensitive to the various constituencies, not just from the president's office, but all the way down to the students. John, were you about to add something?
Yeah, it's so easy. It's no secret, David, to your point. These sorts of projects either end up often in statements or spinning off into some kind of theoretical realm that is inaccessible to regular human beings, especially when academics are involved. So I found it incredibly delightful that this particular project came up with useful and usable and specific and actionable recommendations. It wasn't just merely pie in the sky work. And to Governor Gregoire's point, suggestions that were, and this is probably not a word, contextualizable, or could be contextualized within and could be tailored for specific contexts. If you look at the University of Chicago statement, for example, one of the beauties of that statement is that it suits the University of Chicago. It's built for them. And so I think that was a model of the work that we did also, to make, among the recommendations were, find something that works in your environment.
And I think we tried to tried to show some examples too, like there's different statements in the back, the different types of universities have put together on free expression, recognizing that, you know, what Chicago does versus what University of Richmond does versus what somebody else does might need to be different. And I think that was partly because we had such a diverse group of individuals on the task force that came from really different types of institutions. And so we even talked quite a bit about the different kinds of free expression challenges we'd had on our campuses, and they varied quite a bit. You were a public institution versus you were a private institution versus you were a private faith-based institution. How those play out are quite different, and then how you need to deal with them can be quite different.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Linda. Maybe you could take the lead, Linda, if you wanted to, and let's get down to some of the recommendations. I'm sure viewers are wondering, what are these strategies? Maybe you could address one of them, Linda.
Yeah. Well, you know, one of the things we talked a lot about was how to better prepare our students to be able to have conversations in a free expression environment. So we've got to create, there were recommendations about creating an environment on our campus around free expression, but also students come to us oftentimes without any ability to know how to have a difficult conversation on issues that they might feel really strongly about and somebody else feels very differently about. And so how do we help them understand that we're on a college campus, where part of what's going to happen is you're going to be challenged about what you think about, and you're going to really be asked to be able to articulate clearly, evidence-based, why you believe what you believe, and that you need to be able to have those difficult conversations. One of the very specific recommendations is to think about what we do in freshman orientation. As students come to our campus, are we doing things in freshman orientation to help them understand that part of the college experience is to be challenged in your thinking and to learn how to listen, learn, and articulate very clearly what you believe, so that when you have those situations in class or in student organizations or other places, your reaction is to listen and learn and then speak to some extent, as opposed to just shutting off of an opinion that's different than your own. So there's a lot of education for students that's involved.
Anyone else on strategies or specific recommendations?
To Linda's point, most of the students at most colleges and or universities come from extremely homogeneous high schools and backgrounds. And their college experience often is the first time they have this kind of encounter with people from international and diverse backgrounds, and with a diversity of perspectives. So it's really necessary to figure out a way to practice proactively and prepare proactively our students for this pluralistic environment. I have actually one illustration. If I don't know, David, if you want that now of.
Sure, you do.
Yeah, okay.
What you like, John?
So one of the things I encountered early in my presidency among student athletes was I visited with the student athletes, and the second question out of the box was, Mr. President, are we allowed to kneel during the national anthem as it's sung or played at athletic events at our institution? And of course, that's a question that's fraught across the board. So I answered the question without a yes or no. I said, of course you're allowed to kneel. This is the United States of America. You know, we have, our First Amendment rights, you can kneel. But let's talk a little bit more about this. What are some of the reasons that you want to kneel? Students then were resounding in their response. We feel that there are racial justice issues that we need to address. And that's one of the things that kneeling will demonstrate. And I said, do you think that kneeling in front of during the national anthem or when the American flag is being flown would be a successful strategy? And they said, we think it would. I said, would you be open to a conversation, a campus-wide conversation? And we initiated a series of campus-wide conversations called Dialogues on the Quad, in which we brought together people from a variety of backgrounds, people from law enforcement, people with military backgrounds, people whose loved ones had died for the flag, and leaders of Black Lives Matter and college activists. And we set the ground rules around how do you actually have a conversation? How do you have a meaningful and respectful conversation? At the end of the day, we took some initiatives on campus that dealt with racial justice issues. And at the end of the day, no students kneeled. So we felt like it was a growth experience for people on all sides of this question.
I'm really glad you shared that story, because one of the things your report stresses is the importance of administration knowing what to do before the incident happens, knowing what the good policies are, knowing where you stand. You were very quick to have an answer for the students. And that's because you've thought about it before. And then knowing how to approach the tricky questions and how to be patient with both sides in that debate. What other positions, policies, strategies does the report recommend?
Well, to your point, David, one of the things that we really were trying to make sure we put across was from as Linda put it, from the moment that student sets foot on that campus, have that student believe and understand the culture that's there. And it's an opportunity for them to take risks and question their own thinking and question the thinking of others in what should be a fairly protected area, because once they get out, they need to have the skills to deal with it beyond, to make sure that the policies and so on are put in place. So faculty and coaches and everybody understands the culture, and never let a day go by without reinforcing this is the culture of this institution. Not try and create it in the middle of a crisis or deal with it in the middle of a crisis, but have it in place, test it, emulate it, bring the conversations forward like what John was talking about on an ongoing basis, so that when the crisis happens, you can deal with it. But also in doing so, hopefully the community will accept that culture and the legislature will not intervene and not interfere, but allow that culture at that university to stand and not be denigrated in any way.
One of the statements, David, that the report makes, which we all know, is that controversies are inevitable. So if we're not prepared, it's our fault, because none of us should be shocked when these issues come to our campus.
Well, and related to that, one of the areas you see focus on, and you've mentioned this, David, is how we deal with our trustees or regents of our university, because we know when controversial things happen on our campus, lots of times our trustees or regents are getting calls and emails about those, and they sometimes have strong opinions about how you should respond to those. So having policies and practices in place that they're aware of is also important, because you need your board to be supportive of what the administration is doing. And one of the things that we did at Baylor over the last, it was probably over a year ago, we did some tabletop exercises with our Board of Regents on free expression issues. We created 4 or 5 scenarios, either that we'd had specifically on our campus, that we anticipated having on our campus potentially, or that we had seen on other campuses. And we walked our regents through in small group discussions those various scenarios and got their insight on how they think we should handle it, how might we address it, what kinds of issues would we face. And we found that to be very, very helpful, because one, it helps them to understand the kinds of free expression issues we're going to have, and then make sure that we're all kind of in unity of thought and approach for how we're going to deal with those. And those kinds of exercises, tabletops, can be done with students, they can be done with faculty and staff. We chose to use it with our regents, but it was a very good hands-on experience that gave them very concrete examples of the kinds of things that go on our campuses.
And David, while we don't want to assume that, in fact, what John said is absolute, the students that are coming to campus today all too often come from a really insulated background, and this is their first experience to diversity of thinking and diversity in every respect. So don't assume that they're equipped and capable of dealing with it. The same can be true of our professors. Are they comfortable having this kind of open dialogue with their students? Can we help them go through a couple of exercises where they become more comfortable and are more open and can handle the situation better themselves? So we really thought we need, and that's why, as in the appendix, we gave examples of here's what you can do in talking about a subject with your trustees or with your coaches or with your professors and so on, so that people begin the process of not only learning how to do it themselves, but feeling comfortable.
I really loved the way the report broke the problem and the solutions down into various constituencies. So the trustees, the president's office, the administration in general, students, faculty. I remember, I think faculty need to be encouraged, and I love the idea of trying to get at student leaders in particular. I remember a few years ago we had a conflict on Baylor's campus between a conservative group that was doing some pretty insensitive things, saying some pretty insensitive things about our LGBT students, and then the LGBT students were infuriated, and they were really wanting to make a war on campus against the conservative students. And I remember sitting in my office thinking, somebody ought to be teaching these students how to act civilly and have civil discourse with each other. And I'll never forget that it dawned on me, wait a second, I'm a professor of political philosophy. Maybe that's me. Maybe I should do it. And I just want to say, two of our co-sponsors could be really helpful in this way. In that situation, I got a small grant from the Institute for Humane Studies, and they were willing to pay for my getting the leaders of the conservative group and the LGBT group together for a conversation about civil discourse, and that went really well. I think getting at the people can really, really help. And the other is Braver Angels, who's been coming to college campuses and demonstrating a kind of parliamentary style of talking about very fraught issues in a way where the rules make it easy for people to be respectful towards each other. So while we're talking about specific tensions, when you were forming the report, let me put it this way: freedom of speech is an age-old liberal value, but it does come up against, it seems, every generation. It comes into tension with some other good. Maybe it's religious orthodoxy. Maybe it's a scientific paradigm that's crumbling. And it seems like freedom of speech has and can overcome these competing goods, but I think in the thick of it, it always seems like maybe it should give way. And I wanted to ask you all, what are some of the competing goods on college campuses that give rise to the conflict or the pressures that are on freedom of expression? What are the competing values that seem to put pressure on free expression?
I'll jump in. Oh, please, Linda. Please.
Oh, well, I'll start. There's several. One, and we talked quite a bit about this, and it's referenced in the report, is the view in some people's minds that free expression is in conflict with diversity, equity, and inclusion goals. And that as we try to create kind of safe environments for our students of color or students that may be different in some way than our majority students on our campus, that somehow some expression needs to be limited in some way. And so I think part of the challenge on our campuses is one, helping people to know how to have these conversations so that you are respectful of people, even if you strongly disagree. And we've talked about that. But I think it's also, the reason we've made progress on diversity, equity, and inclusion issues is because we have had hard conversations on it, because people have been willing to speak up and protest and march and bring legislation forward. And so, we don't make progress on hard issues if we don't allow free expression. So it's a tension, but we've got to figure out how to make it a tension that we can work through and not a tension that keeps us from having those kinds of hard conversations.
Yeah, I agree entirely, Linda. The freedom of expression over the long haul especially protects the rights and the safety, especially of underrepresented minorities in terms of their voice and the voice at the table. One of the goods, David, that I think is in conflict maybe under stress is what I really want to say, under stress in our culture, exacerbated, of course, by social media. I'll be the first one to use that phrase, social media. I mean, that's really was lurking, kind of surreptitiously under a lot of these conversations, is that social media, not only are students unprepared, Chris, to have these conversations, they're ill-prepared or mal-prepared by social media, where the impulse response it leads to a deterioration of any sort of listening or any humility in these conversations. You cannot learn without humility. One of the things I do with at first-year experiences, I ask the students to tap themselves on the chest 6 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now repeat after me. I don't know everything. And, I mean, Alexander Pope was right. Little learning is a dangerous thing. Drink deeply or touch not the Pyrenean spring. For shallow draughts intoxicate the brain, and drinking largely sobers us again. That is drinking of knowledge. So there are these communities, these intellectual communities, where we have a responsibility to curate knowledge within a community of practice, to use Alistair McIntyre's kind of framework. And so inside of a community of practice, of course, there are disciplinary standards of evidence, and they permit us to have a conversation, an academic conversation with particular lexicon and a particular kind of a language and a particular kind of way of thinking within a particular kind of way of understanding how I know something to be true. In other words, it has to be more than just, I just feel like it's true. And so, teaching this virtue, this ancient virtue of the practice of humility and of listening, I think, is deeply embedded into our responsibility.
That's great. The report actually used the word epistemology, which I don't think I've ever seen a report come out of Washington, D.C. about epistemology. But John, to your point, it stresses the importance of not just relying on your lived experience.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. I mean, yeah. I mean, the truth has to be truth that is more than just specifies my own being or my own identity. I mean, and so we're looking for, and academic communities ought to be about the business of transcendent truth, not just these tribal truths that are always at war with one another.
And David, I really like how you address the conflict that grew on the campus between the LGBT and the more conservative students by bringing them together. One of the things that we were trying to get across in the report is it's one thing to be opposed to something, to John's point, by social media. It's a far different thing if you actually sit down with the person and engage in a conversation and have a human interaction, a lesson that seems to have been totally lost in the United States Congress, and look where we are today because of it. So trying to encourage students, again, in the safe space of a college campus, to be able to be respectful and so on, starts with that human interaction. And so you may like the person or dislike the person, but the point is, let's talk about what we don't agree with, or our different philosophies or our different views, rather than in some way disrespecting, humiliating, doing whatever to the individual.
Yeah, great. I thought the report, it was at a certain point courageous, and it's because, and this is what really sold me on the value of this report. It could have very easily gone this way. There are tensions between diversity, equity, and inclusion and freedom of expression, but those tensions aren't real. They're just apparent, right? But the report does not take that line. The report says they are often real. There are often times when things we want to do in connection with diversity, equity, and inclusion pose a problem for free expression, and vice versa, things that we want to say that pose a problem for diversity, equity, and inclusion. So these are both good goals, but they do actually clash. Not all good things fit together harmoniously. And the report was, let me say how I interpreted it and see if you would agree, but I read the report as saying there will be those clashes, but there must be free expression.
Yeah, dissonance is inevitable, but it's also a mark of a free society, right? And places where we can disagree not less, but disagree better. Find ways
like
that
that.
we can, yeah, exactly. I'll stop.
Well, and I think on a college campus, university campuses, if we can't do that on a university campus where we're really about ideas and thinking and discussion on important issues and learning, honestly, where in the world are we going to be able to do it? And so I think we have to be a model. And frankly, we haven't always been a great example in this country of that. And that's been some of the criticism and part of what motivated the report. But we really need to be a model in this country for how we can bring people together with very diverse opinions and have valid discussions. And then frankly, hopefully try to find some common ground on which we can work to solve some of these really difficult problems. And as Chris said, we haven't seen that much in our legislatures, whether that's at some state levels or federal level. And we've got to prepare students to be able to do that, not just in our campuses, but when they leave our campuses and go into businesses and politics and various organizations, because these issues are not going to get easier in the future. They're just going to get harder.
But we're not just talking about unfettered free expression.
Right.
So you look on page 37 of the report itself, where the University of Richmond statement on free expression occurs. Anything that incites imminent lawless action or falsely defames a specific individual, that's off limits. And the university has the right to exercise a limit on the freedom of expression.
It's very helpful to remember that none of our liberal freedoms are absolute.
Yeah.
They all have to be adjusted to fit with each other and the competing goods. I wanted to ask about faculty, because faculty are a part of our culture. They're on the campus and they're teaching students, but they're not insulated from the cultural forces that are causing polarization. And the report has some things to say about helping faculty learn how to have hard conversations, because it's not an inborn gift to be able to walk into a classroom and without making a misstep, touch on some issues that people are extremely invested in. What about faculty? Maybe this to our two college presidents. What can we do to help faculty do better at facilitating open, honest discussion and not self-censoring? That's a problem too. Faculty who self-censor. There's some things obviously ought to be censored. I've learned from 20 years of teaching. I always say to myself, don't say anything in a classroom you wouldn't put on a billboard on I-35, and that's been very helpful for me. And obviously there are some things that we should show restraint. But at the same time, we do want to be able, and we have to be able as faculty, to touch on issues that are controversial and current. And so what kinds of resources, how can we help faculty do that better?
Well, I'll start, and then John, you can add your thoughts. I think one of the things we need to do better in doctoral programs of preparing our graduate students to do this, because one of the things we found is sometimes our more mature faculty understand it better than our newer faculty or those that are graduate students teaching. So I do think we have some responsibility with our graduate students that are teaching, with those that are going through our doctoral programs, to help them understand how to lead these kinds of conversations. I also think we need to make sure, and this goes back to the culture we create with senior leadership, with our boards, that faculty know that free expression is safe on our campus, that you can actually, within the right, kind of respectful boundaries, that you can talk about hard issues, you can encourage free expression. And so we need to make sure faculty feel comfortable that they can do that. And then I think modeling for faculty how to have those conversations in the classroom is really important. I'm going to actually use David here as an example of that. I was actually talking to my staff about this session, and one of my staff members actually had David and his wife Elizabeth in an honors college class back a number of years ago, and it was a religious freedom, religious liberty class. And this was just a few months after the Obergefell-Hodges decision that legalized gay marriage. And so they led a very rich discussion in class around that decision and the perspective. And you can imagine at a faith-based institution that there were a wide diversity of views, I suspect, on that issue. But this employee of mine that was in that class talked about how rich the discussion was, what a great job David and Elizabeth did leading that discussion in what was a very difficult topic and a very controversial topic, particularly in some religious venues. And so I think they modeled as faculty how to have that kind of a conversation on a difficult issue, and without the students having any sense of what they personally believe as they went through that conversation. And so I think faculty, as helping faculty know how to do it, helping them model it in their classrooms is really important. It's not like they taught a lesson on how to have a hard conversation to their students. They just illustrated it through having it in the classroom. And so I think there's a lot of different ways we can work with faculty to help with these issues.
Yeah, so if the question is what can college administrators and presidents do to help faculty have these conversations, amen to everything that Linda has said. I would only add, I get somewhat irritated with administrators who never find their way into a classroom themselves, so they have no idea what's going on in the primary craft of the institution. I think the more administrators can be in classrooms, even teaching, I think the better chance we'll all have in terms of understanding the specific faculty challenges. And we'll realize that these faculty challenges have no kind of 3 quick steps, 7 easy, 7 highly effective habits of diverse communities where free expression abounds.
Yeah, this is tricky because it's not like a set of principles you can teach to faculty. It's not that kind of thing. It's practices that you have to acquire sometimes through hard knocks, but you can come to learn what to do. I wanted to ask, let me say first of all that folks who can watch, we've got 200 viewers. It's a good time now to put some questions in the Q&A. We have a Q&A function here on Zoom, and you can put some questions in there, and my team will send me some of those questions here on my smartphone, and I can, in a minute, I'll turn to questions. I'd love to ask our panelists things that you're interested in, viewers. There's one, everybody teases me for not knowing much about sports, but there is an athletic side to this report, and so I'm treading carefully, make sure I speak correctly, but there's even concrete advice to athletic directors. Why should sports be singled out why is that a separate consideration, and what are the considerations there?
Well, John gave a wonderful example of how he worked with his athletes on his campus. And I think there's some unique reasons for the athletic departments and athletes and coaches to need some special guidance. One, on many of our campuses, our student athletes are among our most diverse populations compared to our broader campus populations. They are also on many campuses among the most high profile students that have a lot of people paying a lot of attention to the things they do and say. And so I think a couple things can happen. One, there can be a lot of pressure on them to speak up and be a voice on these issues, particularly around diversity and equity kinds of issues. And then the response that they get can be much stronger, either positive or negative. And so helping coaches be prepared and athletics administrators be prepared for the fact that you're going to probably be in a bigger spotlight than some other areas of campus and some other student groups is important. And then frankly, helping student athletes understand, that certainly it's appropriate to be engaged in these kinds of conversations and to express your views, but also helping them understand and be prepared for the reaction they might get to that. And I think what John did was such a beautiful example of them having a desire to do something and then talking through how you're going to have the most impact to get the point across that you want to. We actually worked with our student athletes on a couple of different occasions where they did, marches across our campus and were very visible doing that and did it in really appropriate ways. But they wanted to express their views and do it in a way that would have an impact. And so again, their visibility, the nature of the diversity of our athletics programs, I think put some added light on that population that we've got to make sure we're prepared to help our coaches and administrators and athletes deal with these issues.
The only thing I would add to what Linda said, David, is coaches tend to be the face of the university to the community at large. Sometimes not in the best of circumstances because alums have really large opinions on sports and what should be done or not be done there. But so with that coach having that direct communication with the community, it's important that they represent the culture of that university in a way that when a crisis should occur, the community will rally around the university.
On that point of community relations and universities, Governor, it seems to me you're uniquely positioned to make a comment on this intuition I have, which is that if colleges and universities can't get this right, free expression, it seems like they could and are losing credibility in the wider polity. Do you think that's true?
No, I do, and I think that's what's happening now, which has driven me to want to be engaged with the Bipartisan Policy Council and with folks like Linda and John. I find it very disturbing that the lack of respect and confidence in our colleges and universities seems to be diminishing at a time when I think they're the most important thing we've got going. It's our future. Those students are who we are tomorrow. And like both my colleagues have articulated, I'd love to have our colleges and universities be a model to how legislators and everybody else in the community should be confronting the tough issues in a respectful and in a way that we're not being models to the students now. Let the students be a model to us. So, and I am absolutely committed to the idea that legislative bodies should not be telling university presidents what they can or cannot do in this realm. This is the responsibility of that college and its campus to create that culture of inclusion, that culture of free expression, and that the two can coexist. And the only way we do that is by helping our college presidents and ensuring our trustees are there for the college presidents and so on, to make sure that all of that is respected by the legislative bodies and the community at large, so that those college campuses can flourish.
Thank you for that. We do have some good questions coming in. I thought I would share a couple with you. Here's one. How do you suggest addressing students' need to feel safe as justification for not inviting certain speakers to campus, especially regarding sexuality and race? Where angels fear to tread.
I'll take that. I think, well, and certainly others will have their views as well. I think, and we've had a couple of situations like this on our campus. One, bringing in speakers that talked about human sexuality. We had an LGBTQ speaker a couple of years ago that was, was somewhat controversial. We've had some speakers around race and other things. And so one of the things we've tried to do is work with those groups of students that might feel unsafe about the speaker coming in for fear of what might happen around that, and maybe try to offer an alternative experience for them at the time that speaker is on campus that allows them to express their views differently, or to be in an environment where they feel comfortable while that's going on. And that has seemed to work very well. We also certainly try to make sure, just from a physical safety perspective, that we have the right staffing, and whether it's security or whatever around the event, to ensure that it's safe. And frankly, we do a lot of pre-work for speakers that might be controversial, to talk to folks at other campuses where those people have spoken, to find out what kind of issues and concerns they've had on their campuses and around particular speakers. So I think working with those students that are saying that they feel unsafe about it, to help ensure that they have an alternative or an environment while that speaker is on campus that they can feel comfortable in, is one of the things that can be done. There are certainly others.
Yeah, I've seen us do that. It did work. Yeah.
We spent considerable time, David, on this very topic in the task force. It was one of our main sort of topics in our conversations. And the words that I remember being raised by a variety of colleagues in our meetings were words like respectful, and a kind of respectfulness that is embedded in the institution, kind of like horizontal integration of a culture of respect around having difficult conversations. And another word I remember us using in these conversations on the task force was the word resilience. We also, I believe, have a responsibility to build resilience in our students so that they can be prepared for difficult conversations. If you think a college campus conversation is difficult, go out into the world, the business world or the political world, and see, how that suits you. So I think part of our responsibility is to prepare students for these difficult conversations.
I find this issue of speakers incredibly difficult, and there's some. I wish I could have been at the task force, because I know organizations that want to bring speakers to campus, and they have sort of student organizations on campus, and but they have no interest in campus culture, and they actually want to be controversial, and I think they want to raise money for their donors, right? And they would love nothing more than for the event to be protested, possibly even violently, so that they can point fingers. And there's got to be, doesn't there, some line has to be drawn about whether a speaker is academic, or whether this is actually whether this is something from which we can learn, or whether it's actually ideological politics coming to campus. I don't know how to make that. I don't know how to draw that line myself. John, do you?
I don't know, but I do know this, that there needs to be an academic purpose for every conversation that happens on our campuses. And so we invited in 2019 as our commencement speaker, and gave him an honorary doctorate, Ben Sasse, the United States Senator from Nebraska. To that same event, we invited Hawk Newsom, the leader of New York Black Lives Matter. And, I had conversations with both of them before they spoke on campus about the sorts of boundaries of the conversation in a religiously affiliated institution. There are certain boundaries to the conversation on both ends, and in both cases, both speakers were incredibly respectful while on our campus, at least.
David, one of the things, again, that started this conversation for us at the Bipartisan Policy Council was both of the incidents that were of concern that occurred at Berkeley and occurred at the University of Washington were not done by students. They were done with outsiders. So college campuses need to be clear about their security issues and make sure that the forum in which these controversial individuals speak does not invite in or allow in some instances, folks that are not affiliated with the university. They get priority seating, they get to be a part of it, they're who the focus is. The other thing I have always tried when I've worked with folks is to say, and it may be my legal training, you are better articulating your position if you have a full and complete understanding of the opposite view. Listen to it really hard, dig deep, understand it. That helps you formulate, or maybe ask yourself, am I right? And if I still feel I'm right, how can I phrase how I'm right better based on what I've heard by someone else? So anyway, I'm with John, putting it into the context in which these debates are taking place, and not allowing people with a different agenda, which is very clear, violence by way of your mention earlier, that happened on the college campus in my own hometown.
And I think one of those two examples
there. Go ahead, Linda.
Well, those two examples, and I think it shows some of the differences in institutions. We're at public institutions. And so public institutions actually have less ability to manage some of these outside speakers than private institutions do. So those of us that are private have a little bit more ability to kind of manage who comes on our campus and who doesn't, whether they're affiliated with the student group or whether they're not. And so public institutions really do, from a true free speech perspective, have some of those challenges, and that's how they played out. But it also reemphasizes the importance of being prepared for how you're going to deal with those things, just from a physical safety and security perspective as well, in addition to the other things you wrap around them.
But as you know, Linda, because of our affiliation, there can be an equal and opposite orthodoxy that crushes a speech
Yes.
that is dogmatic and doctrinal and denominational and all of that stuff. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And so I believe that the leaders of those of institutions like ours must fight on the other side as well. I mean, fight for the right of freedom of expression is what I mean.
Here's a question coming back to social media, which John had brought up briefly, but it does seem like there's maybe two edges to the social media sword. And the question is, I believe an important piece here is students learning to vet information. I know one of the panelists mentioned social media and the impact it has had on communication and expression. What do you think the role of social media and vetting information could be in the college classroom? I'm not totally sure I understand that question, but I think what it's asking is, isn't there a positive side to social media as well? No?
Yeah, I mean, because one of the social media allows lots of information to travel to lots of people very quickly. And so there certainly can be positive to that, as we need to get emergency notifications out to our students, right? Or we need to tell a lot of people about something that we're doing. But it also allows false information and false accusations to travel very fast. We see a lot of cyberbullying because of this. So, you know, I think where we, again, I think this is part of our responsibility, and you want students to have gotten some of this education before they get to our campuses, but how do we help students understand how to curate what they're seeing on social media?
Mm-hmm.
Because we know so much of it is coming from a very partisan, and I say that very generally, there's lots of partisan ways information can come to them. And so they've got to learn how to examine that information, to know what the sources are, to ask questions, and not just believe everything they see. And that's hard.
Mm-hmm.
And I think students have gotten to where they just kind of believe what they read without critically thinking and investigating it.
So to the point of critical thinking, exactly. What is the difference between information and knowledge and wisdom and helping students to kind of discern those fine points? I think you're exactly right, Linda.
These questions are really outstanding. Here's another one. How do we think about power dynamics on campus, particularly between faculty and students? Shouldn't faculty be held to different standards than students because they have a larger and more powerful platform? How do we respond when a faculty member says something that is perceived as racist? Doesn't it have a bigger impact than if a student had said the same thing?
That's
it's a good question. Let's think it through.
You know, I think that when we have situations like that, I think a lot of these things go down. We talked about this earlier, personal conversations with individuals, whether they're faculty or students, about what they said, what the context for that was. And, was there an educational component to that? Was that tied somehow to the nature of the learning experience that had happened in a classroom that gives it some legitimacy, versus it was them expressing a personal opinion in a classroom that could frankly be viewed as racist, and intentionally so in that kind of a setting? And so I think we have to have folks working with our faculty when we get those kinds of complaints to work with them and try to understand what happened in that session while listening to the students as well. And then certainly there are times that we give guidance to faculty because what they said in the classroom was maybe inappropriate given the context of what was going on in that classroom.
I would also encourage students to be courageous and let the faculty member know that something he or she said was hurtful, because a lot of times, I include myself, especially when you're teaching Socratically, you misstep sometimes.
Yeah.
And you want to have the chance to say, I'm sorry, I regret that I said that.
And I think students learning in the moment to tell someone that what they said was hurtful or offensive is a really important skill to develop, whether it's with their fellow students or with the faculty, and how to do that in a way that is helpful to the situation. Because we all know that's uncomfortable to do that, and learning how to do that, I think, is important for students and for us as faculty and staff.
I just like to the questioner reinforce, in my personal opinion, I'm not a faculty member, nor am I a president, but yes, faculty members are held to a higher standard. And there has to be a check on their power because they have so much power. If we want to have that kind of free opportunity that Linda's talking about, where a student is encouraged to say something and say it on the spot, then it has to be met with receptivity and respect. And that means, going back to what we were talking about earlier, really not assuming these faculty members know how to deal with that. Let's say they inadvertently said something and the student says something back. Are they going to automatically get defensive and so on? So we've got to make sure that we recognize that power structure. We recognize they're held to a higher standard, and don't assume they know how to deal with those kinds of situations without our support and our help and training and modeling.
My earlier comments, David, about humility not only pertain to students, pertain to these specialists in their various fields, that they are also a part of a learning community. And at the heart of Socratic education is this mutual learning that occurs. So
yeah, it seems like if faculty can get class started with room for charity, and to ask for charity, and to say, look, I am going to make mistakes. Part of what makes the class exciting is that it's edgy. I haven't written my lecture out. Okay, so there can be mistakes, and then ask for forgiveness. I think is a way that kind of short circuits that power concern. Power is there. You don't have to be cynical about it. Right. You can recognize it. Somebody has a question about faith-based institutions in particular that is interesting. Basically, the question is, are there some things that really should not be tolerated at faith-based institutions because they have sort of different boundaries on what sort of things are, I'll just use the word orthodox or not orthodox. Let me actually read the question because I don't think I'm doing justice to it. Should faith-based institutions have different boundaries for what sort of speech they allow faculty and students to engage in? If not, why not?
Yeah, that's a difficult question to answer in the abstract.
I thought that Chris's comment about where she was quoting John Stuart Mill, he who knows only his own side of the case knows little of that, is Mill. And it seems like, could we at Baylor take students through a serious study of Friedrich Nietzsche? The answer should be yes, right? In order to understand. I'm hard pressed to think of any boundaries. My experience at faith-based universities has been that we are freer to talk about things because we can bring the history of Christianity and serious faith conversations in. But I've never felt that there weren't things we could talk about. Linda, has that been your experience too?
Yeah, I think we try to create an environment where our faculty and students should feel free to talk about any of these really hard issues and to bring very diverse perspectives to it. Now, we clearly get letters to the president's office sometimes and calls when that happens, that one's constituent group or another doesn't like that we've allowed that speaker or that conversation to happen. But again, it kind of goes back to this idea that if students are truly going to form their own understanding of issues and their own belief about issues, you've got to expose them to diverse perspectives. And so, I'm not going to say outright there's not anything we would ever not think shouldn't be on our campus, because I don't know, there may be something out there that I haven't thought about, but I think we really try to create an environment that is open to these diverse views and perspectives, in the context of a campus that has a Christian worldview and a Christian foundation to what we believe.
So faith seeks understanding, and so on the one hand, but on the other hand, the institution that is affiliated religiously also has a right to assert what its kind of creedal commitment is.
Well, and we sometimes say on our campus that all truth is God's truth, and that all truth is then open to inquiry. And if we truly believe that, we shouldn't be afraid of different views and different inquiry, because at the end of the day, from our faith perspective, all truth is ultimately grounded in biblical truth.
I often say, if you turn over the rock of inquiry, there are no monsters there that can come and gobble up God. God can handle it.
That's very good. panelists, I'm watching the number of viewers and it's not really dropping. I want to be respectful of your time, and I would expect after an hour here, some people would start to drop off. Maybe we'll just take a couple more questions if that's okay. This one, we have maybe 5 or 6 questions here that are on the same point, and I think Governor Chris Gregoire would be best suited to answer them. Several questions about the role of government and lawmakers with respect to intervening in and proactively addressing challenges of free speech at universities. What's the appropriate expectation for our policy leaders? Another question is, what are you doing when legislatures are trying to intervene? I think your answer earlier was stop it, right? But what can you say something about why it's not appropriate for government to try to affect the culture on college campuses?
Well, first of all, in any state, you've got religious affiliated, you've got secular, you've got public, you've got private, you've got land grant, you've got research, you've got all kinds, right? So to not respect the differences between each of those and their respective cultures. Now, I don't want to be overly assuming that every college campus has the same values as been articulated here, and will carry it out with the same fervor that the 2 individuals that are my colleagues here today would do, or the individuals that were on our task force. But I don't believe when it comes to free expression, it's the purview of a legislature to tell a college president on campus what they can or cannot do. I just think that is not their role. Now, what we were trying to do with our task force is to make sure that these college campuses are equipped by creating the right culture that marries up freedom of expression and diversity, equity, and inclusion, and all of those things. And if you do, then you can resoundingly stand up to a legislative body that's trying to intervene and take control of the campus. If you fail in doing all of that, you can expect you're going to get that kind of reaction from your legislative body, right, and you're not going to be ready to fight back. So that's why 2 governors were so much engaged in this, is to make sure that college presidents are forming that kind of culture and making sure it exists so that they can be resilient to the kind of influence and interference that legislative bodies are apt to want to do. Does that make sense?
Oh, it sure does. That's a very, very helpful answer. Let me end with a question directed at Hope. I think there are a lot of things that should give us hope, and I wanted to give you each a chance to think about your role and the effect you've had with this report, for example. But what sorts of things give you hope for the future of free expression here?
Well, I'll start with, I am not a professor and I'm not a college president. And this was one of the most positive learning experiences to deal with these people on the task force that I've had in a long time. It gave me immense hope. I put all my hope for the future into these college campuses in the hopes that there's our leaders of tomorrow who are going to be able to marry up the free expression and diversity, equity, and inclusion in a way that can be a model to the rest of the country, quite frankly. And the leadership that I saw on our task force said to me, it's there. We need to respect these college campuses and how they're trying to help these students prepare to lead the country as we look forward into the future. So I deal in part of my job with, I deal with major international corporate leaders who desperately want colleges and universities to deal with students to prepare them for all of this. I also deal with a number of young folks because of my volunteer work. And I'm about as encouraged as I could be. They want things better and they want to learn how to constructively make it better. So I'm quite hopeful, to be perfectly honest with you, because of what I saw, what I heard at our meetings with these college presidents and so on. I think there's a great future for our students and for the country.
Thank you.
I would add, one, I think we've had a great response to the report. So I think it shows there's a tremendous amount of interest out there and a desire to work on these issues and to have some concrete insights about how to do that. So that gives me optimism. And I would kind of build on what Chris said, certainly on our campus. I mean, you gave an example, David, of a where you worked with two student groups that had been in conflict with one another. And I think where we've done that, students have actually been very responsive to it. And so I think that I see hope in that as we educate students about how to have these kinds of conversations and deal with these controversial issues, they're responsive to it, because I think they learn that they can have more impact and make a bigger difference if the ways in which they're speaking to issues that are important to them are done in the right ways and can actually add more value. So I'm hopeful, because I do think we have really bright students in this country that want to have an impact. They want to make a difference. And if we can just help them understand how to do that in the most effective ways, I think there's a tremendous opportunity ahead.
Two things about hope. Hope has two children. One is anger at the way things are, and the other is courage to dare to make a difference. And I see this task force at doing exactly that, a dissatisfaction sort of with the way things are in higher education now, but hopefully working hard to make a difference so that democracy can continue to move forward, where free people, Aristotle says, deliberate the question, how ought we order our lives? And I like that last word, together. How ought we order our lives together?
That's a wonderful answer. I know viewers, I know the panelists would want me to thank our co-sponsors one more time. It's Academic Freedom Alliance, American Council of Trustees and Alumni, the Institute for Humane Studies, Heterodox Academy, and the Chautauqua Institution. I want to thank the Bipartisan Policy Center for having the vision to put this task force together and for producing such a great report. The report is available on their website. It's very easy to read. It's not very long. It's readable, accessible, and it's chock-a-block full of concrete strategies. I would like to thank each of our panelists for the conversation today. It's been a real delight to hear your perspectives. Thank you all.
Thank you, David.
Thank you, David.